Okay, so we're going to do a condensed version of Bible study that I did for the live this morning. And this is where we're talking about Samuel and the heart of Saul. We see that Saul's heart in this situation was divided. It was divided between the Lord and also man and himself. He wanted to be able to please man and preserve himself, preserve his reputation, preserve who he was in front of the people. He was so concerned about people pleasing that he would take the instruction from the Lord and modify it and change it. You see, let's take a look at the first instance. This is 1 Samuel chapter 15. Samuel said to Saul, "I am the one the Lord sent to anoint you king over his people Israel. So listen now to the message from the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they waylaid them as they came up from Egypt. Now go attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys." You got to see how specific this instruction is. You see, it's not just specific so that Saul would know what to do. It's almost seems as though it is a setup. I want to see what you'll do. Will you follow my instruction exactly how I gave it to you? Because there'll be no wiggle room. There will be no room to be able to say, "I didn't understand," or "I thought I could." Well, I didn't know. It doesn't just say, "Now go and destroy all that belongs to them," right? It says totally destroy. Now, when we hear totally destroy, there's no room for error, but it even goes beyond that in specificity. It keeps going. Do not spare them. Put to death men, women, children. It starts listing it out. Infants, cattle, sheep, camels, donkeys, right? It's listing out exactly what it is that the Lord wants to have done. Will he do it? You see, so many times we get to the point where God gives us specific instruction that we're supposed to follow. And what do we do with it? Let's find out what King Saul does with it. King Saul, it says, verse 9, "But Saul and the army spared Agag and the best of the sheep and cattle, the fat calves and lambs, everything that was good. This there were unwilling to destroy completely, but everything that was despised and weak, they totally destroyed." So you got to see, they were unwilling to destroy completely. The interesting thing about that is that they went to battle. They went and did some of what the Lord told them to do. If the Lord hadn't told them to do that, would they have gone? They went, they fought. They just didn't do all what the Lord told them to do. He took it upon himself to decide further after God had instructed him. It says, look, the soldiers, chapter 21, or chapter 15, verse 21, "The soldiers took sheep and cattle from the plunder, the best of what was devoted to God, in order to sacrifice them to the Lord your God at Gilgal." So they decided upon themselves, and they want to use an excuse that they saved the best so that they could sacrifice it over to the Lord. They didn't save the king to be sacrificed just to the Lord, because they would have killed him. But the interesting part about it is that they thought 3/4 obedience was going to be good enough. We can do some of what God is telling us to do, but we're going to fall short of the rest, and we're going to do what we want to do with it. That's not the way how God works. They try to come back and say, oh, well, it's because we want to sacrifice. And Samuel has to tell them, does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifice as much as in obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. Listen, for rebellion, they did 3/4 of what God says, but he still looks at it as rebellion, like the sin of divination. Sin, y'all. For rebellion is like the sin of divination, and arrogance like the evil of idolatry. The arrogance, like the evil of idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. Do you see that? It's the rebellion he looks at and likens it to arrogance, idolatry, sin like divination. 3/4 of obedience is still rebellion to the Lord. You need to look at the step that God's asking you to do today. And if you are doing partial, if you are doing almost all, but you are not doing all, it is not obedience. These words like obedience, surrender, submission are not halfway. It's complete. It's either all or nothing. Either you are or you aren't. But when we don't, it is something that says about our heart posture that we don't believe that the Lord's instruction is complete, that we don't trust in the wisdom and will of the Lord. It should stop there. We should not go any further than what God says. And God says it is done. Period. But we take that farther. God looks at that as rebellion. Has God given you a step and you want to modify it, and you want to change it, and you want to alter it? I need you to know you are moving outside of the will of God. See, he wanted to be pleasing to the people instead of being pleasing to God. He wanted to be pleasing to himself instead of being pleasing to God. So this is what God tells Samuel, right? He says, or this is what Samuel says, is that then Saul said to Samuel, oh, my bad, verse 26, but Samuel said to him, I will not go back with you. You have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you. The Lord has rejected you, because you did not do what the Lord told you to do. Now let's go back a little further than this. This isn't the first time that that Saul had went against what he was supposed to do. We see earlier in chapter 13, in which Saul has an army of 3,000. Once when Jonathan was with him, he had 1,000. Saul had 2. Together it was 3,000. Once when Saul had attacked the Philistine outpost, or Jonathan did, word got around that Saul attacked him because they were still part of his army. The Philistines started to assemble. They started to gather. Look, 3,000 chariots, 6,000 charioteers, and soldiers as numerous as the sand on the seashore. So they were so scared, y'all. Saul remained at Gilgal, it says, and all the troops with him were quaking with fear. They were quaking with fear. So he waited 7 days, the time set by Samuel, in which Samuel was supposed to come and do the burnt offering. But since he didn't come in time, Saul offered up the burnt offering. And it says, just as he finished, Samuel arrived. You see, this lets me know that this was a setup too. I'm going to do a part 2.